People don't always want to talk about mental health, but many people are navigating mental health disorders, including young people. In 2021, more than 1 in 3 people between the ages of 18 to 25 had a mental health challenge in the past year. That's according to the 2021 National Survey on Drug Use and Health. Medina Jett's son is one of those young people. He was 20 years old when Medina found out about his bipolar schizoaffective disorder. She writes about that experience in her new book, Peace Be Still, Navigating My Son's Bipolar Disorder. Medina hopes that sharing their family's experience will help normalize conversations about mental health. This is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Today we hear from 2 parents who are mental health advocates. Later, we'll talk with a father who shares how his daughter shapes his approach to mental health and wellness. A note to our listeners, this episode includes some difficult discussions about mental health. Up first is Medina Jett. She's an attorney, real estate developer, and president of Jett Speaks. She's also a mental health advocate and author of the new book, Peace Be Still, Navigating My Son's Bipolar Disorder. Medina, welcome to Disrupted.
Thank you so much.
You have accomplished so much in your professional career across a range of spaces, a range of states. You've created opportunities for other people and for communities. And your work has now turned in a very personal way of thinking about mental health and what it means to advocate for those closest to you within that realm of speaking truth to the experience. Share with our listeners what inspired you to take this turn and not take a turn in terms of a departure, but to really say this is something we need to lift up. What's the inspiration?
Yeah. My son obviously was my inspiration. When this happened to him, he was a junior at Bowdoin College and life couldn't have been better, and this happened to him. And when I raced up to the school and I saw him in the condition that he was, in the mental state that he was, I was totally knocked off my rocker. And I have always been this person who is very much a problem solver. Like, okay, we're going to figure this out and we're going to get it back on track. And I realized that even for someone like me who has a lot of corporate experience and personal experience with a lot of different things, this was so new to me. And it took me years to figure out how to navigate this mental health system that we have, how to convince doctors that my son was worthy of treatment and care and compassion. And I realized that if this is happening to me, it must be happening to other people. And as I started to share my story, everybody that I would talk to about what I was going through with my own son, they had a story. And either it was their child or their grandchild or their niece or nephew or their neighbor's child. It's like everybody was 1 degree away from somebody dealing with a mental health condition. And I figured if this many people are dealing with this pretty much in silence, they must be struggling worse than I am, because I consider myself to, I can figure it out. I am not like the quiet wallflower. And I then, as I started speaking more broadly about mental health, I realized we're in a state of crisis. This country is in a mental health crisis and nobody's talking about it. So it's not getting the attention that it needs. It's not getting the funding that it needs. And so that was really my reason for writing the book and for trying to really raise the level of awareness around mental health conditions, is because no one's talking about it. And if no one's talking about it, no one's getting better.
Let's talk about the crisis that, as you said, many people aren't talking about it. And let's address the elephant in the room. There's a lot of shame and stigma wrapped up into mental health, where, as you said, so many people are struggling to figure out how they help others, or even, frankly, how they help themselves. But
Hmm.
there's this belief that there's something wrong with you, or what did you do to contribute to this condition, or
Exactly.
did you not see what was happening before it got to this point? And I think, Medina, that shame and stigma is preventing people from coming together, but also realizing the magnitude of it. And for you, as
Right.
someone, as you said, has figured it out for lots of ways, I'm curious if you experienced that of my son is in crisis, deserves help, but how are people going to respond to him or to my family if we talk about this very personal experience? How did you navigate that as a mom?
I don't think I ever thought about how do I talk about this, because my first and primary and only goal had always been to get help for my son by whatever means necessary. And so if that meant going into the hospital screaming at doctors because they're not giving him the care that he needs, so be it. That's what we're doing today. And when it comes to the shame and stigma, you are so right. I found so many people who reacted to me talking about it like, "Oh my God, you're so courageous. How can you talk about it? How does your son feel about that?" And I've had a number of people say to me, "I would love to share my son's story or my daughter's story, but they would never want me to talk publicly about it." And there's so much wrapped up in that shame and that stigma. As my son was going through this, my older sister was also battling ovarian cancer. And so many people would call and check on her and how is she doing? How's she reacting to the chemo? And then that was it. Okay, bye. And I'm like, well, wait, you didn't even ask about Dre. Like, don't you care how he's doing? It was almost as if people wanted to put that bad thing aside and just talk about the thing that they were more comfortable talking about and asking about.
You know, you've touched on a lot in that, and I'm smiling as I'm listening to you. I got into trouble a couple of weeks ago. I had to give a speech in my hometown, and I had the audacity, as someone told me, to say that it's okay to have Jesus and a therapist. And they were so offended by that. And I was like, look, this is how I make it through. But what you've tapped into are these social, societal factors, structural factors, that all of that creates an environment where, in some ways, we're more comfortable with talking about the challenges that we can see versus
Hmm.
those that we cannot. It makes it real in a particular way. And author Stephanie Fu talks about this as bone memory, the ways that grief, trauma, pain get encoded into our bones and they get transferred through. And so let me make it really plain for our listeners here. You are an African American mother raising an African American son. I shouldn't say raising because he's an adult now,
Hmm.
but loving an African
Still
American
raising.
son, right? Still forever. Raising an African American son in an environment where the perceptions of a Black man's size and stature can often impact how people see them. Do they see them as worthy of sensitivity, or do they see them as a
Right.
threat, especially when they are in crisis? How would you say that things like race and to some extent class may shape not just what you're experiencing, but really what you are advocating for us to
Hmm.
recognize?
Hmm. There's a lot in that question. My son was 20 when he had his first manic episode. He is 6'1". He is a football player, right? And he had dreadlocks down past his shoulders. He was not a small person by any means. And I think the fact that he was an African American male and also a sizable African American male had a lot to do with how he was viewed. When we got him to the hospital that very first day in Maine, I write about this in the book, how he was frightened. We took him into a back room for his psychological evaluation, and it turned out to be very cage-like. It wasn't your typical emergency room. They had brought down the metal walls inside the room, so it was nothing but metal walls and a bed with straps. And my son was scared and he tried to run. And as he tried to run, six security guards grabbed him, threw him onto the bed, strapped him down, and then a doctor came in and injected him with a sedative as if he was an animal. And that's what it felt like to me. And I said, I wonder if they would be treating another kid like this. Is it because he's a Black male? Is it because he's a sizable Black male that they thought a sedative was the only way or the only option that they had, and that they thought this cage was the only place for him to go and talk to a doctor? And so all of those things I dealt with throughout this journey with him, because there were times where he would have a manic episode and I searched myself because we were in the middle of the pandemic and George Floyd and Black men being killed by police was very prevalent in my mind. And there were times where I had to call the police, where I had no other option. And I remember standing in a parking lot with a group of police officers telling them, do not harm a hair on his head. Like, I need you to go in there. Do not touch him. I think he will go with you voluntarily once he sees you. And it's that anxiousness around being a mother of a Black man in America that I think plays into a lot of this. One of the things that brought it home for me, and I talk about this in the book as well, my son had disappeared. He had a manic episode right after my sister passed away, and he relapsed. He was lost in the city of Hartford for 4 days. When we finally found him, he had no shirt, no shoes. His dreadlocks somehow had been chopped off, and he just was dirty. He looked like a homeless person, and it just broke my heart. I called mobile crisis. I called the police, and we're right on Albany Avenue in Hartford. The police arrived and they said, well, which one's your son? And I pointed him out, and he was slowly just walking down the street as if he was in a daze. And the cops looked at him and said, he looks fine. And I said, that person looks fine to you? Like, what are you seeing? And so it wasn't until I pulled out my phone and I showed them a picture of Dre at his Kingswood Oxford graduation in a suit and a tie, leading his class in the processional. And they looked at the phone and they looked at my son and they said, that is that person? And I had to explain to them, he's having a mental breakdown right now. His favorite aunt just died 3 days ago. And I had to go through this whole thing to humanize my son for them, because all they saw was a homeless Black man on a street. And what's wrong with that? That's the way they see us anyway, I realized. And I can only imagine what it's like for parents who are not at a certain level of assertion, who don't even know how to articulate what they need to articulate to a police officer, to a doctor, to a mobile crisis unit, or whatever it may be. And I realized it's not a socioeconomic thing. This is happening to us. And, it happens to a lot of middle class, upper middle class, lower class, working class, no matter what class you're in, it's impacting our children. And Black men are the ones who are getting very little recognition for what they're going through, because they're just the most or the least valued among us.
Coming up, more from mental health advocate Medina Jett. She'll talk about her son and his openness to discussing mental health today. And later, Mikkel Clark explains the power of being honest about career challenges. This is Disrupted. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Today we're talking with two parents who are advocates for mental health. This episode contains some difficult discussions about mental health and suicide. We've been speaking with Medina Jett, author of Peace Be Still, Navigating My Son's Bipolar Disorder. Before the break, Medina told us about the start of her son's mental health disorder back in 2018. I asked Medina how her son is doing today.
He's doing fabulous right now. He's been in a supervised housing program that's funded by the state of Connecticut for 14 months now. He has a part-time job. He sees his therapist twice a week. He's taken his medication consistently for 14 months. And right now, like knock on wood, you would never know that he's managing through this mental health condition. And, one of my fears always is that he'll feel so good, he'll think that he can do without the medication. And that's what is ends up being the downfall for a lot of people because they think that they've knocked it. They've defeated it and they don't need the medication anymore. And so I keep telling him the way you're doing right now, it's because of the medication. Like keep doing what you're doing. Even if you have to pop that little pill every day for the rest of your life, it's worth it if you can have your life back. And if I can have my son back and society can have you back, And so that's the thing I have to keep telling him. And knock on wood, I persevered and he persevered.
The challenges that many people are facing are enormous, and we are finally getting to a place where we can name it and we can talk about it in a way that when I was a young person, we knew there were people struggling. We didn't have a name for it. We couldn't really put it into a recognition, but I see those things changing. My last question to you, Medina, is given all that you are navigating, all that you are building with and for other people, what gives you hope that we will get this thing right?
My son gives me hope because I saw him come from his very worst, his most vulnerable, where I wasn't sure he was going to be one of those people who survived suicide. He definitely had ideations. And to see where he is now, it gives me hope that if he can do it, a lot of other people can do it as well. But we've got to keep talking about it. We can't brush it under the rug. I talk to him every day. You have bipolar. You need to accept that and do something about it. He is now at the point where, he started his part-time job and he walked in and he said, I've got bipolar. I'm hoping it won't be a problem, but I just want you to know what I'm dealing with. And he openly talks about it. And I think other people, if they could get past the stigma and have people understand what they're going through. I said, a closed hand can't get fed. You've got to talk about what you're dealing with in order to get help for what you're dealing with. And so seeing him and how far he's come gives me so much hope for other people, but we've got to keep talking about what works, what doesn't work. How do we change the system that is really set up not for us at all? And there's so much work to be done, but I think we're certainly on the right path.
Medina Jett is an attorney and president of Jett Speaks. She's a mental health advocate whose newest book is Peace Be Still, Navigating My Son's Bipolar Disorder. Medina, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you so much.
If you or someone you know is struggling, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration National Helpline is 1-800-622-HELP. That's 1-800-622-4357. Much like Medina, our next guest also thinks about mental health and parenting. Mikkel Clark is author of Eyes on the Road. He offers poetic advice based on what he's learned through his own experiences, including becoming a father. Mikkel, welcome to Disrupted.
Thanks so much for having me. It's good to be here.
I want to talk about the work that you're doing because I think the ways that you are creating spaces for conversation and engagement around mental health also speak to that creative core of who you are and how you engage. What would you say is the key motivation for advocating for mental health? What's inspiring you to do that work?
I am inspired to advocate for mental health and healing and personal growth because I have desperately needed those conversations at many points in my life and didn't know who to talk to. Before I thought of myself as being an advocate or even thought about what I was writing about as being mental health related. I was alone and depressed and about to be expelled from college. And so that is where my writing practice started. And I've gone through different phases. I'm a father and I'm an entrepreneur. And in so many chapters, I have to have these talks with myself. And what I share is just the snippets of what I'm thinking about and writing through.
I want to focus on the word you just said, which is healing. And the idea that when we can affirm that we are worthy of healing, that we are capable of healing, and how we connect to that is powerful. One of the things I appreciate about this book and about your creative work more broadly is that you are engaging people where they are so that it doesn't have to feel scary or intimidating or using a bunch of big fancy words for people to say, I'm not okay in this moment and I need someone just to see me. Talk to us about the book, Eyes on the Road, and how it created opportunity for you to bring this together.
Absolutely. Eyes on the Road I think the back of the book really sums it up for me in every way. And it says you can cry and keep your eyes on the road at the same time. I've been healing and recovering from so many things during different areas of my life. And at the same time, I have to show up for professional obligations, for family life, for myself. The world does not stop moving. Capitalism is always going to do its thing. And so I realized that during certain parts of my life, especially in my 20s, I let work be my excuse for not addressing some of the harmful beliefs that I was carrying about myself, and some negative emotions about things that I hadn't healed from. And I got to a space where I would explode at little things. And it wasn't about the little thing, it was about the emotions that I had been carrying that I hadn't given myself permission to release. And so, Eyes on the Road it's a lot of prose and a bit of poetry that I hope gives people permission to feel all their feelings, to know that they are enough as they are, and to embrace that sufficiency and to allow that to dictate how they show up in the world. I talk a lot about my personal healing journey, about overwhelming emotions, and just different things that I have been growing through. And I will always be a skeptic to some extent. And I think that what allows me to resonate with people is that if I don't believe in something, I can't write it, I can't share it. And so a lot of this is the result of me going back and forth and finding what actually makes sense and what feels helpful to me with hopes that it feels helpful to somebody else.
There's a sense of authenticity to the work that you do, but there's also a very strong sense of vulnerability within that work. And in a space, in a culture which often does not allow for vulnerability, or in some ways can punish and regulate that vulnerability because of gendered expectations, class expectations, whatever that may be, all those isms that are wrapped into that, you're creating an opportunity to be vulnerable, to speak to your challenges, but to also speak to the power and the possibility. How do you find that people receive that work, especially those who may say, this in some ways is uncomfortable for me because I'm feeling all the things that you're saying. I've been through that, but I may not be in a space where I can articulate that or that I feel safe to do it. What's the response been?
I think one of the most memorable moments in my entire career as a writer is when I wrote about the first 6 months of my career as an entrepreneur, which was very unprofitable, very unsuccessful by every metric. And it was a huge mental hurdle for me to get past that period and to believe in myself again. And so about a year later, I wrote about it, and I wrote about the feelings behind it more than the how I did this, because that's what I felt led to write about. I felt good about my path as far as an entrepreneur, but it felt more important for me to share the emotional weight that I had to get off my shoulders to move forward. It felt like a natural thing to me. And so I shared the piece. I was worried about it. I think I sent it to a few friends first, like, should I post this? And the response was overwhelming. I can't even begin to put into words the just the love that I felt from DMs and texts and even LinkedIn messages, just expressing that people felt the fear that I felt, the inadequacy that I felt, the desire for support and the lack of support that I was talking about in this piece. And that was a really key moment when I realized that I didn't think that vulnerability was an exceptional thing, but a necessity. And I still think that. I think that a lot of difficult things are also necessary. I'm the guy who I have chronic pain in my back, and I will, so it'll sound kind of weird, but I literally lie on what is a bed of nails. It's an acupressure mat to get rid of the pain in my physical body. I think that emotional healing is oftentimes the same. You have to lie on a metaphoric bed of nails. You have to experience the pain to release the tension, to release the frustration, and to be able to move towards healing. And I think that I've experienced so much that I've held in, and I've exploded as a result of that. And so I know what it's like for me to hold everything in, and the pain and vulnerability required of expressing myself in full and being judged. I'll choose that over just holding everything in anytime.
Coming up, more from mental health advocate Mikkel Clark. He'll talk about how fatherhood shapes his approach to mental health. This is Disrupted. Stay with us. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Today we're talking with author and mental health advocate Mikkel Clark about how he considers his own mental health and well-being. Ask Mikkel what failure has taught him.
Failure has taught me that there's always a day after failure for as long as I live. That I can make a mistake, I can experience some degree of humiliation or judgment, and I can get up the next day and take what happened and learn from it. I can apply it, I can operate differently, I can think differently. Failure was the boogeyman for me for quite some time, and if I'm being honest, it still is on certain days, but now I have a discography or a history of failure and improvement and self-education and growth and reflection. And I know that I can try a new thing, and it might not be the best first attempt, but my 10th attempt is going to be a lot better. My 50th will be even better. And I think that's a big part of why, I've moved into visual art this year. I've performed poetry on stage. I've delivered my first keynote speech in over 3 years and felt good in all these different mediums. When a different version of me would have been a lot more timid, a lot more shy to move into a new space, even when I am invited. And so I think that before I was able to be confident in moving into new spaces, I became confident in accepting failure. My ego was still barking a little bit, but I grew more accepting of the failure after the fact.
One of the new spaces that you have moved over into in the last few years is the space of fatherhood and of being a parent. And you wrote an essay called Parenthood, the Most Beautiful Mess. And I want to share with our listeners a line from that essay. You write, "It is our responsibility to set the boundaries that will help us to maintain relationships with the people we love." What does that mean for you? What are those boundaries that help us maintain relationship and connection?
Man, I could probably write a whole different essay about that line right there. I think the really beautiful thing about becoming a parent is so many people want to help, want to contribute, and want to call you. And whatever their version of showing up, whatever their version of showing up may be, they express at minimum a desire to show up, right? And then it gets nitty gritty, and we are sleep deprived, terrified, exhausted. Uh, it's our first time as parents. The first month that we were parents was a dark haze. We didn't know what to do, how to operate. It was our first time raising an infant who depends on you for every single thing. And people would be very well intentioned, but I don't want to FaceTime you with you at 8 a.m. after I've been trying to put out fires with kid and job and everything else for the past, 8 hours or entire day. The way you want to show up for me right now is not only not what I need, it's actually harmful because you're taking away from things that I actually need. And so in that season, there's a lot of frustration. We experienced a lot of shifts with different relationships, and we had to learn that people can love us, and we can still require significant space from people, despite them wanting to show up, despite them wanting to do things that they thought might be helpful. The advice, the well-meaning advice from people who have made different choices about how they want to raise their kids. We opted into gentle parenting, which I'm sure you know is different than the belief systems that many of us were raised on. And that also required a willingness to push back. And so you're talking about people who raised us in many different ways, who were our guidance, our adults when we were kids. Now we're saying, no, this is our daughter, and we are going to raise her in this way. And I appreciate the perspective, but that's not how we're moving. And so that season required just so much clarity and decisiveness, and us just being more vocal than ever when it comes to what we will and will not make space for.
We are approaching Father's Day, which is covered in all kinds of different notions of what that means and how people experience it, and the ways that many fathers, particularly Black fathers, feel like they are fighting against a mythical standard or expectation that can be crippling and overwhelming, but in some ways can be empowering. For as you say, to be able to say with authority and without hesitance, this is the way that I am creating a connection. How did becoming a father help shape your advocacy or your understanding around mental health?
Mm. I am the first man that my daughter Ada ever met. When Dwanisha, my wife, was giving birth, there was a moment when the doctor said, "Okay, Dad, I need you." And I was the dad. And so I had to run around and catch her and hold her. And I, since then, have become her second biggest influence, second to the woman that birthed her. And so that means that my mental health impacts her every day. If I am exhausted, if I'm not taking care of myself, if I am frustrated, she feels that. And she doesn't have words for that, but she feels that. And so there have been many instances where I will be in a space because of all the adult things that matter less than her, but I spend my time thinking about. I'm always thinking about some form of work or my health or my goals, along with parenthood and family, of course, right? And when I don't feel at my best, when I can't show up in the loving ways that she needs, the supportive and expressive ways that she needs, she'll act up. And I have to sit and check myself and say, she's probably irritable because you're irritable. She's probably being short because you've been short. She is a reflection of me in every single way. And so one of the most important things that I can offer her, there's all the hard skills, the education, tying your shoes, but It is my understanding that I deserve to be in good health. I should take care of myself. She needs to learn that she deserves to be in a good space mentally, to be healthy physically. And that is shown by how I carry myself and how I prioritize my health so it can help her.
You are so right. You deserve a life that is rooted in something deeper than survival. Talk to our listeners about that being deserving of something deeper than survival or mere existence.
Yeah, I'll go intergenerational for this one. My parents were raised by sharecroppers, which I know this, and as a parent, the more I think about it, the wilder it is to understand that, I grew up in a black military family. Um, that was luxury, to have a single family home, to have one job. My mother was able to work from home, or sorry, to not work at all and to take care of us. Um, that was the life. That was incredible. And my father still would leave for work around 5 a.m. He might get home around 7 p.m. because he had a long commute, and he'd be, out of town for multiple days, which led to a different dynamic. And I think that a lot of the more difficult dynamics that I experienced, I love my family. I'm very thankful for how I grew up, but a lot of the difficult dynamics that I experienced, happened because my family, we were still learning how to survive. There was no security net. There was no extra support. Half the time, my parents were living somewhere on a military base, and it was them and maybe my dad's coworkers, majority of whom were not black, not of the same culture, that didn't have the same values. Um, and I experienced the benefits of their hard work and the gaps that happened because of the systems that did not support them. And so for me to be the first generation of Clark fathers that has a strong support system, my parents will come up here for anything and everything. They gave me the best they could. They made sure that when I fell short financially, educationally, I was supported. And that gave me the opportunity to stand on their shoulders and to be more aware, to be more understanding, to have more empathy, to think more clearly about what I want to be true, and to move into a space of, oh, well, this is how I find not just stability as far as finance, but happiness and fulfillment and joy and these deeper but still relevant needs that many people just do not get. And I think that that is what allows me to show up in this world the way that I do. Not that I'm better or smarter, but because I have the ability and the support that I need to thrive. I think that when we have the ability to thrive, we find our purpose. We find what we are truly called to do. And that's one of the most rewarding things you can ever experience is knowing why you're on this earth, what you are meant to do with your time, and who you're meant to serve.
You are creating spaces, you are creating opportunities, you're creating a life vision to serve those purposes for you and the people that you are connected to. But you are also creating opportunities for others to embrace that and to realize that even when things are difficult, there is a kernel there of possibility that we can harness. And so my very last question to you is, given all of that, what brings you joy?
My daughter seeing me after school and running into my arms brings me joy. Everything with her, of course, in this era, seeing her grow and move through the world, seeing my wife happy and fulfilled. We're doing the Hard 75 challenge right now, which requires us to drink a gallon of water per day, work out twice per day, read 10 pages of a book, take a progress picture, and have some type of diet. And so I've seen her just feel just so fulfilled and more empowered as a human being to take care of herself. She's happier. That makes me happy. For me, being able to do in real life things with my work, have conversations, deliver speeches, even things like this to be able to talk to real people and to feel interpersonal connections with people who care about things that I care about. That's beautiful to me. Um, I love my calisthenics. And so that brings me joy. Designing art, writing, and at some point in the next 50 years, when my Washington Wizards are doing well, that will also bring me joy. 75 years possibly. We'll we'll give it some time.
I mean, I appreciate your optimism. And remember what we talked about failure and the lessons we learned. But who knows? The Wizards could turn it around. Mikhail C. Clark is a writer and mental health advocate. He's author of Eyes on the Road. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This was beautiful.
If you or someone you know is struggling, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration National Helpline is 1-800-622-HELP. That's 1-800-622-4357. Disrupted is produced by Kevin Chang Barnum, Wayne Edwards, Meg Dalton, and Katie Tolarski. You can listen to all the previous episodes of Disrupted by finding us wherever you get your podcast. I'm Kalila Brown Dean. Thanks for listening.